Before we begin, let me ask you one thing. Would you sign a contract knowing it might cost you your heart? Stick around, because what started as a cold agreement turned into something neither of them could escape. If you love stories that surprise you when you least expect it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Let's begin. They say you don't hear the moment your life breaks. You feel it, like a silent, heavy crack somewhere deep inside your chest. I heard nothing when the doctor laid the bill on the counter, but I felt that crack split me wide open. $300,000. That was the price of my father's life. A heart surgery he couldn't survive without. A number we could never reach. Not with our little wooden chair shop struggling to sell a single piece all winter. Not when the bills had already swallowed us whole. I spent that night in the attic of our old home in Ashbourne, Maine, searching through boxes of memories, looking for anything we could sell. Anything. My fingers brushed past old photographs, rusted tools, yellowed receipts, until I found it. A blue linen scarf. I held it carefully, breathing in the faintest trace of lavender that still clung to the fabric after all these years. It had been my mother's. She used to wear it on cold nights, sitting by the fireplace, humming lullabies while mending my clothes. I pressed it to my lips, closing my eyes, wishing I could crawl back into one of those nights when life was small and soft and warm, and that's when it slipped out. A folded letter, hidden inside the scarf, sealed but never sent. My heart stuttered as I carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, neat, slanted, delicate. But it wasn't addressed to my father. It wasn't addressed to me. It was for him. Lucas. I read every word twice, my hands shaking harder each time. My mother had written it years ago. A letter of apology, of regret, of love she had never dared to give. She wrote about a boy who had once knocked on our door asking for work. A boy who was turned away by my father's pride and my mother's silence. Lucas Ford. I knew that name now. Everyone in Ashbourne did. He'd built the largest luxury furniture empire in the country. He owned the skyscrapers in Portland, the factories that stretched across states, and the kind of silence that came when people knew better than to speak his name. The same boy my family had turned away had become the man who could save us. I knew what I had to do. I found him at the top of Ford Industries Tower, standing behind a glass desk that overlooked the whole city like it was nothing more than a chessboard. He didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, he looked like he'd been expecting me all along. Elena Grace, he murmured, leaning back in his chair, his voice smooth as ice sliding over glass. How long has it been? I swallowed hard. You remember me? I remember everything. The weight of those words settled in my stomach like a stone. I clutched the scarf tighter in my coat pocket, trying to find my voice. My father. He's dying. He needs surgery. I don't have $300,000. He finished for me, tilting his head like he was inspecting me. I know. I held my breath, waiting for him to tell me it was impossible, that I should leave, but he didn't. Instead, he slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. A contract. Marriage. 1 year. In exchange for my father's medical bills, paid in full. My throat tightened. I stared at the paper, then back at him. Why? His lips twitched, not quite a smile. Let's call it unfinished business. He leaned forward then, hands clasped, eyes dark and unreadable. Sign it, Elena. And tonight, you'll be mine. The word mine hit me like a slap, leaving a hot sting that spread through my chest. I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to scream that he had no right to offer me like I was some piece of property. But the truth burned deeper than my pride. I had come here knowing I would say yes. Not for money, Not even for my father's life, but for something much smaller, something far more foolish. A hug. The hug my mother had written about but never given. The hug I had dreamed of since the first time I saw Lucas Ford standing on our porch all those years ago, drenched in rain, waiting for someone to choose him. I wanted to give him what she never had, even if it was just once, even if it cost me everything. With trembling hands, I reached for the pen. My signature looked foreign beneath his on the page, but it was done. I lifted my eyes to meet his, bracing for the cold distance I knew was waiting for me. But Lucas stood slowly, circling the desk, stopping just inches away from me. I felt the warmth of his breath brush my skin as he leaned down, his voice a quiet command that sent a shiver down my spine. Tonight. I closed my eyes, clutching the scarf in my pocket like a lifeline, and for the first time in my life I realized I had no idea what I had just signed up for. The car that picked me up was black, sleek, and far too silent. It felt like slipping into a hearse, driving me towards something that had already died. Maybe it was my dignity. Maybe it was the girl I used to be before I signed that paper. Lucas didn't ride with me. Instead, I sat alone in the back seat, clutching my mother's scarf in my lap, pressing my forehead against the cold window as the city blurred past. Every turn, every mile stretched tighter around my chest. I didn't know what waited for me at the other end, but the weight of those two words, tonight, mine, kept echoing in my mind like a slow, steady drumbeat. When the car finally stopped, the driver opened the door without a word. I stepped out, my breath catching in my throat. The house wasn't a house at all. It was a mansion. Glass and stone, towering over the cliffs of Portland Bay, standing alone like a king with no kingdom. The wind smelled of salt and cedar, but underneath it all was something else. Warm, sharp, rich. Sandalwood. The moment I stepped through the door, it hit me fully. The air was thick with it, filling every corner like it had seeped into the walls themselves. It was the same scent my mother used to burn in the old wooden incense holder by the fireplace. For a second, I could almost hear her humming again. But then, the door shut behind me, and the memory shattered. Follow me. The voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Lucas stood at the end of the grand hallway, his black suit untouched. By the wind outside, his face unreadable as ever. I swallowed hard and followed him, my steps muffled by the thick rug beneath my feet. The house was too perfect, too clean, like no one had ever really lived here. The furniture was minimal, sharp-edged. The walls were lined with glass shelves, filled not with family pictures, but with awards, contracts, and pieces of polished woodwork, reminders of the empire he had built with his own hands. He stopped in front of a closed door. This is your room. Not ours. Yours. The words landed heavier than they should have. I stared at the doorknob, unable to move. I'll have the guest wing prepared for your father's nurses tomorrow, he added, his tone clipped, distant. You'll find everything you need inside. I finally looked up at him, searching for something, anything, that might explain why he was doing this. Why he was keeping me at arm's length after everything he had demanded just hours ago. Is that all this is? I whispered. A deal to you? His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed cold. What else would it be? I flinched, my throat burning with words I couldn't let out. I turned the knob, pushing the door open with shaking hands. And then I stopped. My room wasn't empty. Laid neatly on the bed, on top of crisp white linens, was my mother's scarf. Freshly washed, pressed, smoothed out as if someone had been holding it, preserving it. I stepped inside, my chest tightening, and picked it up with trembling fingers. It smelled faintly of lavender again, like someone had tried to bring it back to life. I turned slowly, my voice barely more than a breath. "Why do you have this?" Lucas stood in the doorway, his face still like carved stone. He didn't move. He didn't speak. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't dared to believe. He had never let it go. The scarf, the memory. Me. I clutched it to my chest, blinking back tears I hadn't expected. For a moment, I wanted to run to him, to ask him what this all meant. But the wall between us felt taller than ever, so I turned my back to him. "Good night, Lucas." I heard the door click shut behind me, sealing me inside a room that smelled of sandalwood and something I couldn't name. I sank onto the bed, curling up with the scarf beneath my cheek, and let the tears fall silently into the pillow. For the first time since I signed that contract, I wondered if this prison was built not of walls, but of all the things we had never said. And the worst part? I didn't know if I wanted to escape. The scarf was still tangled in my fingers when the door creaked open hours later. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I stayed curled on the bed, clutching that piece of faded blue linen like it was armor, like it could somehow protect me from what I already knew was coming. The air shifted before I heard him step inside, heavy, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood floor. My breath caught somewhere in my throat as I felt him standing there, watching me, Elena. His voice wasn't cold this time. It wasn't sharp or distant. It was low, almost strained. Like he hated what he was about to do, I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, curling deeper into the blanket. "If you're here to remind me about the contract," I whispered, my throat tight. I already remember. The silence that followed stretched thin between us, and then I felt the mattress dip behind me. He didn't touch me. Not yet. But I could feel the heat of him, the tension radiating off his body like static in the air. "I don't need to remind you," he murmured. "I think you remember every word." I swallowed hard, fighting the tears that threatened to rise again. "So, this is it? You get what you paid for?" He was quiet for so long that I almost dared to turn around and face him. Almost. But then I felt his hand, heavy and warm, curling around my waist. I flinched, but he didn't tighten his grip. He didn't pull me closer. He just held me there, his breath brushing the back of my neck. "No," he whispered, so low I almost didn't hear it. "This isn't what I wanted." I turned then, slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. His face was so close, too close, and for the first time I saw it, the crack in his mask, the raw ache in his eyes. Then why? My voice broke before I could finish. His jaw clenched, and his hand slid higher, brushing the fabric of the scarf still clutched in my fingers. "Because I need to know if I was ever more than nothing to you." My breath caught. "Lucas, I waited, Elena," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I waited for years. For anything. A word. A look. A chance. And you never even saw me." His words hit like a blade straight to my chest. All this time I thought I'd been the one left behind, the one who wasn't enough. But now I could see the truth in his eyes. He had been waiting for me all along. I reached up, my hand trembling as I brushed his cheek. His eyes fluttered shut at the contact, like he hadn't expected it. Like it shattered something inside him. "I saw you," I whispered, the words breaking free before I could stop them. "I always saw you. I just didn't know how to reach you." His eyes opened slowly, locking onto mine with a heat that stole the air from my lungs. His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer until our foreheads touched. "Don't lie to me now," he breathed. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. "I'm not." He didn't move for a long moment. And then, like a dam breaking, he crushed his mouth to mine. It wasn't slow. It wasn't sweet. It was desperate, raw, fierce. Gasped against him, my body freezing for half a second before instinct took over. My fingers tangled in his shirt, pulling him closer as my heart pounded out of control. He groaned softly, lifting me with a strength that stole my breath. I clung to him, trembling, as he laid me back on the bed, hovering over me like he was about to devour every piece of me. And maybe he was. "Elena," he whispered again, his voice wrecked. "Tell me to stop, and I will." I looked up at him, searching his face for the coldness I'd feared. But there was none. There was only him. Only this. I shook my head, my voice barely a breath. "Don't." His lips crashed back to mine, and there were no more words after that. No more walls. No more contracts. Only heat. Only skin. Only us. He took what I had saved all these years, but it didn't feel like a theft. It felt like a beginning. And when it was over, when we lay tangled together beneath the sheets, his arms wrapped tightly around me, I heard him whisper the words I never thought I'd hear from him. "I never wanted your body, Elena. I wanted your heart." I buried my face in his chest, clutching the scarf between us. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was giving something away. I felt like I was finally being claimed. Morning came too quickly. I woke to the weight of his arm, still draped over my waist, the steady rise and fall of his chest pressed against my back. For one fragile, fleeting second, I let myself believe this might be something real, something more than the ink on a contract. But when I turned my head to look at him, the space beside me was empty. The room felt colder without him in it. The air sharp and sterile, like last night, had already been folded away into some forgotten corner of my mind where it couldn't hurt me again. I wrapped the blanket tighter around me, sitting up slowly. My body ached in ways I hadn't expected, but it wasn't just my skin that felt bruised. It was something deeper, something I couldn't put a name to. I found my clothes folded neatly on the chair by the window. My mother's scarf had been laid on top, carefully arranged like it was something precious. I held it to my chest, breathing in the faintest trace of lavender and memory, before slipping it back into my pocket. The house was silent as I made my way down the long hallway. I thought maybe he'd left. Maybe he'd gone back to whatever cold, steel world he lived in when I wasn't looking. But I found him in the kitchen, standing by the window, staring out at the cliffs, his hands braced on the counter like he was holding himself up with nothing but the tension in his shoulders. He didn't turn when I entered the room. He didn't speak. The wall was already back between us. I stood there for a moment, waiting for him to say something. Anything. He didn't. So I crossed the floor quietly, filling the kettle with water, moving through the motions like I had every morning back home. I found the tin of tea tucked away on a shelf, the one that smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla. I knew it wasn't for him. It was too soft, too warm. It had to be for me, I set, the kettle on the stove, my hands shaking slightly as I reached for the mugs, and still, he said nothing. The whistle of the kettle broke the silence like a slap. I poured the water, my throat tight, my heart screaming for me to turn around and demand answers. But the words stayed locked behind my teeth. I carried 2 mugs to the counter and set one beside him. Finally, he spoke. "Don't do that." I froze. Do what? Act like this is normal. Like we're something we're not. I swallowed hard, staring down at the steam curling from the cup. "I don't know what we are, Lucas." He let out a bitter laugh, low and sharp. "We're a contract, Elena. Nothing more." The words hit harder than they should have. I clenched, my fists at my sides, fighting the sting in my eyes. "Is that all last night was to you?" I whispered. He turned then, his face cold, closed off. What else could it be? I felt my chest cave in on itself. I had given him everything. My heart, my body, every piece of myself I had spent years guarding, and here he was, tearing it apart like it was nothing. I shoved the mug toward him, spilling tea across the counter. "You're a coward." His jaw tightened. "Don't start." "No," I snapped, my voice breaking. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to hide behind paperwork and pretend you don't care." He stepped toward me then, his hands curling into fists. "What do you want from me, Elena? What do you expect me to say?" I felt the tears rising fast, burning hot. I don't know. I don't know what any of this means. I thought... I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't have the strength. Lucas let out a long, shuddering breath, dragging a hand through his hair. "You shouldn't have signed that contract." I flinched like he'd struck me. "I didn't sign it for money. I didn't sign it for my father." "Then why?" he snapped, his voice cracking like glass. I felt the words lodge in my throat, thick and raw. "For you." The silence that followed was unbearable. His face crumbled for half a second, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the man underneath. The boy I had known all those years ago standing on my doorstep, waiting for someone to let him in. But the wall came crashing back down just as fast. "Get dressed," he rasped. "We're visiting your father today." He turned on his heel and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there shaking. I didn't follow him. Not right away. Sank onto the nearest chair, pressing my hands to my face, the tears falling hot and heavy. I didn't know how much longer I could do this. Living in a house that smelled like memories I could never reach. Holding on to hope that was slipping through my fingers like sand. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the scarf one more time. And that's when I felt it. Something small. Hard. A button. I turned it over in my hand, realizing it had come loose from the inside seam. There was something etched into the back, 2 letters, worn but still visible. L and E. Lucas, and Elena. My breath caught in my throat. I clutched the scarf tighter, staring at the tiny engraving, feeling the first flicker of something break through the ache in my chest. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it had never really been just a contract. I carried the button with me like it was a secret too fragile to speak aloud. I traced the tiny letters with my thumb the whole way to the hospital, holding it so tightly. In my fist, I thought it might leave an imprint on my skin. Lucas didn't speak much on the drive. He kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched, like every mile stretched him thinner. I stole glances at him when I thought he wasn't looking, memorizing the lines of his face, the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped restlessly on the steering wheel. When we arrived, I reached for the door handle, but he caught my wrist before I could step out. "Elena." I turned, startled by the sound of my name in his voice. Low, almost broken. His grip loosened, falling away just as quickly as it had come. He swallowed hard, looking away. "You don't have to tell him. About us." My throat tightened. "Why not?" His jaw flexed. "Because I don't want him looking at you like he lost you too." I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. But I nodded anyway, too shaken to argue. When I entered my father's room, the air smelled like antiseptic and something colder. Something I hated. His skin looked paler than the last time I'd seen him, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to adjust the blanket on his lap. "Elena," he whispered, his voice hoarse but brightening when he saw me. I rushed to his side, kneeling by the bed, taking his frail hand in both of mine. "I'm here, Daddy." His fingers tightened weakly around mine, and for a moment, it was just us. Like all the years had folded back into a single perfect heartbeat. But then his eyes flicked past me, hardening when he saw Lucas standing in the doorway. "You," my father rasped, bitterness twisting his face. Lucas didn't flinch. He stepped inside slowly, his hands buried in the pockets of his black coat. "Mr. Grace." I stood quickly, placing a hand on my father's arm. "Please." "Not now." My father's gaze snapped to mine, confusion flickering in his tired eyes. "Why is he here?" I glanced back at Lucas, then down at the button in my palm. My heart pounded as I made a choice I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "He paid for the surgery," I whispered. My father stiffened, his face draining of color. "No," I nodded, my throat closing. "Yes." He tried to sit up straighter, but the effort made him cough, weak and trembling. "How much?" I opened my mouth, but Lucas spoke first. "Everything." My father's face crumpled, his hands shaking harder. I told you to stay away from her." Lucas took a step closer, his voice low and tight. "And you, think I ever listened to you?" Tears burned my eyes as I stood between them. "Why? Why did you hate him so much?" My father's jaw worked silently, like the words were lodged somewhere too deep to reach. Finally, he turned away, staring out the window like he couldn't bear to look at either of us. "Because your mother loved him first." The room spun. I swayed on my feet, clutching the chair for balance. "What?" My father's voice cracked, raw and bitter. "She was just a girl. He was the boy who built her dreams in his notebook. She never stopped looking for him, even after she married me." I felt the breath leave my lungs. Lucas didn't say a word. He stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes dark and empty. "She never told me," I whispered. My father let out a broken laugh. "Of course she didn't. She chose me. But I knew. I always knew." I turned to Lucas, my heart breaking open all over again. "Is that why you did this? Why you brought me here?" His eyes finally met mine, and the mask I'd grown so used to seeing wasn't there anymore. "No," he rasped. "I did it because I couldn't lose you the way I lost her." The words hit like a wave, crashing over me, pulling me under. I dropped to my knees, pressing my forehead to the edge of the bed, sobbing into my hands. My father reached for me, but I couldn't bear to move. I couldn't bear to breathe. I felt Lucas kneel beside me, his hand trembling as it hovered over my back. He didn't touch me. He just stayed there, his breath ragged in the silence. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear it. "I'm sorry for every way I've hurt you." I turned, burying my face in his chest, clutching his coat with shaking hands. And for the first time, he didn't pull away. He held me, tightly, desperately, like I was the only thing keeping him alive. The days that followed blurred into a quiet I couldn't seem to shake. I went through the motions, visiting my father, helping the nurses, pretending. I wasn't unraveling from the inside out. Lucas kept his distance. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak much. But every time I turned around, I found him watching me with that same look, like he was holding on by the thinnest thread. I told myself I hated it. I told myself I wanted him to leave me alone. But the truth lived in the space between us, heavy and unspoken, and it terrified me. I stayed at the house longer than I planned, sleeping in that cold, too perfect bed, clutching my mother's scarf like it could keep the walls from caving in. Every morning I'd find little things, tiny, almost invisible signs that Lucas had been there. A steaming mug of tea left outside my door, A fire lit in the fireplace before I woke. The scarf, always folded neatly on the pillow beside me. I wanted to believe they meant something, but I was afraid to hope, until the night I found the envelope. It was sitting on the kitchen counter when I came downstairs. My name written across the front in Lucas's steady, sharp handwriting. I swallowed hard, fingers trembling as I tore it open. Inside was the contract, ripped clean in two, and beneath it, a single note. "You're free, Elena." I stared at the paper, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't understand. He had every right to keep me tied to him, every legal hold, every broken promise. But he had let me go. I sank into the nearest chair, clutching the torn contract to my chest, trying to stop the tears that burned hot behind my eyes. I didn't hear him enter the room until his shadow fell across the floor, in front of me. I looked up, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might break through my ribs. He stood there empty-handed, his face pale and raw and open. "I won't keep you here, Elena," he whispered. "Not like this. Not because of something written on paper." I shook my head, the words sticking in my throat. "Why now?" He swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "Because I'd rather lose you honestly than keep you under a lie." I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the sob rising in my chest. "I won't fight you if you leave," he continued, stepping closer, his voice shaking. I need you to know something before you do." I stood slowly, clutching the contract tighter, every breath feeling like it might break me in half. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A ring. Simple. Silver. Worn around the edges. My mother's ring. I gasped softly as he pressed it into my palm, curling my fingers around it. "She gave it to me the day she told me goodbye," he whispered. "She told me to keep it, until I found the one I couldn't bear to lose." My vision blurred with tears. "I thought it was her," he rasped. "But it was you. It's always been you." I shook my head, choking on a sob. "Lucas, You don't have to say anything," he whispered. "Just, if you go, take that with you." I stood frozen, my heart splintering with every second. And then I ran. I don't remember how I got outside. I don't remember how the door slammed behind me or how the wind hit my face like ice. All I knew was that I had to breathe. I had to think. I ran down the path toward the cliffs, the ring pressed to my chest, the torn contract crumpled in my fist. The wind howled around me, ripping through my hair, stinging my skin with cold salt air. I stopped at the edge, my chest heaving, tears streaming down my cheeks. I could leave. I could take this ring, this scrap of a broken promise, and walk away. Start over. Build a life without him. But as I stood there, staring out at the endless gray sea, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't want to run. Not anymore. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat, when I saw him standing on the porch, his face pale, his hands shaking at his sides, waiting, always waiting. I clutched the ring tighter, swallowing hard as I took the first step back toward him, and then another, and another, until I was running, straight into his arms. Lucas caught me with a ragged breath, pulling me so tightly against him I thought we might break apart and shatter into 1,000 pieces. But we didn't. We held. We stayed. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was falling. I felt like I had finally landed. I didn't know how long we stood there, tangled in each other's arms. The wind howled around us, biting at my skin, but I didn't feel the cold. Not when he held me like that. Like he was afraid I might disappear if he let go. And maybe in some way I had already disappeared. The version of me who walked into his office with trembling hands and signed a contract I didn't fully understand. That girl was gone. The one standing here now had nothing left to prove, nothing left to lose, except him. Lucas was the first to break the silence. He loosened his grip just enough to pull back and cut my face between his hands, his breath uneven. "Tell me to let you go," he whispered, his voice shaking. "And I will." I blinked up at him, my vision blurred with tears, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. But I couldn't say the words. Because they weren't true. They had never been true. I reached up, curling my fingers around his wrists, grounding myself in the weight of him, the warmth of his skin. "I don't want you to let go." He flinched, like the words hurt him. "Elena." I pressed my fingers to his lips, silencing him. And then for the first time, I spoke the truth I had been running from. I don't care about the contract. I don't care about what brought us here. I choose you. Not because I have to. Not because I'm bound to you on paper. But because I want to. His breath hitched, his eyes searching mine like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. I smiled softly, brushing a tear from his cheek with my thumb. "I choose you, Lucas Ford." His hands tightened on my face, and then, without warning, his lips crashed into mine. This time it wasn't desperate. It wasn't forced. It was raw and real and trembling with something I couldn't name. Something that tasted a lot like love. We stayed like that until the wind drove us back inside. He led me to the living room, where the fireplace had burned low, leaving only soft embers glowing in the dark. I sank onto the couch, curling my legs beneath, me watching as he stoked the fire back to life. His movements were slower now, more careful, like he was afraid of shattering whatever fragile peace had settled between us. When he finally sat beside me, I reached for his hand without thinking, lacing my fingers through his. He let out a soft breath, as if that one small touch had knocked the air right out of him. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. I turned to him, resting my head on his shoulder. "Maybe not, but neither do I. And I think that's the point." He let out a quiet, broken laugh, pressing his lips to my hair. "You're the only thing I've ever wanted, Elena. The only thing that ever felt real." I squeezed his hand, feeling the steady thump of his pulse beneath my fingertips. "Then let's start over. No more contracts, no more walls." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his blue eyes shining in the firelight. "What does that look like?" I bit my lip, thinking. And then I stood, tugging him to his feet. "Come with me." He followed without question as I led him through the house, down the long hallway, into the kitchen. I rummaged through the cabinets until I found what I was looking for. A kettle, a tin of cinnamon tea, 2 chipped mugs tucked away in the back. Lucas raised an eyebrow, watching me move around the kitchen like I had done it 100 times before. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. I smiled, pouring the water, my hand steady this time. Starting over, I handed him a mug, watching as he took it, his eyes darkening with something I hadn't seen before. Hope. We sat at the counter, sipping our tea in silence, the warmth settling between us like a promise. No pressure, no demands. Just this. Just us. Later, as the fire burned lower, he pulled me onto the couch, wrapping his arms around me like he couldn't bear to let me go. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. I thought about the ring still tucked safely in my pocket, the button from the scarf, the tiny, fragile thread that had connected us long before either of us knew what it meant. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I wasn't going anywhere. Not tonight. Not ever. 1 year later. The air smelled of wildflowers and fresh-cut wood. I stood outside the small shop on Main Street, running my fingers over the newly painted sign above the door. Elena's Garden and Woodworks. It wasn't just my name on that sign. It was ours. Mine. His. My father's. My mother's. Every part of my life that had once felt broken now stitched together in this tiny corner of Ashbourne. Behind me, the front door creaked open. Lucas stepped out, brushing the sawdust from his hands, his flannel sleeves rolled up, his hair dusted with sunlight. He looked nothing like the cold billionaire who had once stood behind a glass desk, daring me to sign away my life. He looked like home. I smiled as he wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. How long do you think it'll take before the whole town stops whispering about us? I teased softly. He hummed, pressing a kiss to my temple. Hopefully never. I laughed, turning in his arms to face him fully. You like being the town scandal, don't you? His grin was slow, wicked, but warm. I like being yours. Leaned into him, resting my head against his heart, listening to the steady rhythm I'd come to know better than my own breath. It had taken months to rebuild what we'd broken. We tore down the contract. We rewrote the story. He'd bought the old woodworking shop my father once owned, renovating it into a space where both our crafts could live side by side, my flowers, his furniture. Every morning, we'd open the doors together, filling the space with fresh coffee and the hum of small-town life. My father had lived long enough to see it open, long enough to stand beside me on opening day, his hand steady in mine, pride shining in his tired eyes. He'd passed quietly in his sleep 3 weeks later. We'd buried him in the meadow behind the shop, beneath the oak tree where my mother used to sit and hum lullabies when I was small. I'd wrapped her scarf around the base of the tree, tying the loose ends together like a promise. Lucas had held me through every tear. And when I thought I couldn't breathe anymore, he'd taken my hand, pressing something small into my palm. A contract. But this one wasn't printed on stiff legal paper. It was handwritten, ink slightly smudged, the words simple but steady. I, Lucas Ford, agree to spend the rest of my life proving that love is more than a transaction. I, Elena Grace, agree to hold his hand through every season, every storm, until the end of all things. Signed forever. We'd hung it on the wall of the shop, framed in dark cedar, where every customer could read it as they walked through the door. Because our story wasn't something to hide anymore. It was something to build on. Lucas brushed a stray hair from my face, tilting my chin up until our eyes met. You still haven't given me your answer, he murmured. I frowned, tilting my head. To what? He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal the simple silver ring I'd carried with me all those months ago. The one my mother had given him. The one he had returned to me when he set me free. My breath caught. Lucas. He cupped my face, his voice steady and soft. I know we already started over. I know there are no chains left between us. But I need you to say it, Elena. Not because you have to. Not because of anything written on paper. But because you choose. Me. I blinked back tears, smiling through the ache in my chest. I do. I whispered, my voice trembling with more truth than I had ever spoken. I choose you. Now. Always. He slid the ring onto my finger, pressing his forehead to mine, our breaths tangling in the space between us. You're my home, Elena Grace. I wrapped my arms around his neck, holding him close, feeling the steady hum of life moving around us, customers walking by, wind rustling the trees, the distant hum of the coffee grinder inside the shop. And I knew, with every beat of my heart, that this was more than I'd ever dared to dream. This was love, not bought, not forced, but built, brick by brick, heartbeat by heartbeat. We stood there until the sun dipped low in the sky, casting the world in soft gold, and when we finally turned back toward the shop, hand in hand, I knew we weren't just walking back into our business. We were walking into our life, our forever. If this story touched something deep in your heart, take a moment to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to have you here for more heartfelt journeys of love, healing, and second chances. See you in the next story.